You ever notice how some people show their true face the moment someone dies? Yeah. I learned that the hard way. Before I continue the story, kindly like this story, subscribe and tell us where you are listening from. The day my dad died, my world should have stopped. The man wasn't perfect, far from it, but he was my anchor. The kind of presence you didn't even realize you leaned on until it was ripped away. I barely had time to process the sound of his last breath before the vultures circled. And I don't mean strangers. I mean blood. My own sister. I was still at work, because grief doesn't pause deadlines, when she walked in. But she didn't come alone. No tears, no condolences, not even a pretense of mourning. Just 3 lawyers in crisp suits, briefcases in hand, and that smug expression plastered on her face. They were carrying my dad's files, his property deeds, bank records, all of it. Now, imagine this. You're in your office, still reeling from the fact that your father's body hasn't even gone cold, and your sister barges in with an entourage like she's marching to war. That's how I knew, right then, that this wasn't grief. This was greed, and she'd been planning her move long before the old man's heart stopped beating. They sat across from me like predators. One of the lawyers, the tallest one with a voice like a broken typewriter, started droning on about legalities, inheritance divisions, and obligations. My sister didn't even bother to hide the smirk tugging at her lips. She wanted everything, the properties, the accounts, the land my father had worked half his life to build. And then came the demand. Sign over the documents now, or we'll see you in court. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears, but outwardly, I didn't flinch. I didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. Instead, I stood up slowly, walked to the little kitchenette in my office, and poured myself a glass of juice. Orange. The kind that stains if you spill it. I let the silence hang thick in the air as I took the first sip. They thought I was stalling. Maybe even breaking. But inside, I was calculating. Because if she thought she could corner me on the day of my father's death, she had no idea what kind of storm she'd just unleashed. I turned back to them, leaned against the desk, and finally spoke. Everything will be settled tonight. The way her eyes lit up, you'd think I just handed her the keys to the kingdom. She relaxed, exchanged a quick glance with her lawyers, and packed up the papers with an air of triumph. No questions asked. No hesitation. She thought she had me. But what she didn't know was that in that single moment, while I sipped my juice and watched her grin, I'd already decided how this story would end. And spoiler alert, it wasn't going to end the way she imagined. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the quiet of my apartment, the city buzzing faintly outside my window, and I thought about my father. He wasn't a saint. He'd made mistakes, some that cut deep. But one thing about him, he believed in hard work, in legacy, in leaving behind something better than what you started with. My sister. She wanted to turn his life's work into quick cash, a trophy to wave around. And me? I wanted justice. Not the courtroom kind, not the legal kind. The kind that stings. The kind you never forget. I can't tell you everything I set in motion that night, not yet. That's coming later. But I will tell you this, while she was celebrating her victory, I was quietly pulling the rug out from under her feet. People underestimate silence. They mistake calm for weakness. They look at a man pouring juice in the middle of a hostile takeover and think he's cornered. But silence is strategy. And in my silence, I built the kind of payback that would leave scars deeper than any courtroom ever could. By the time the sun rose the next morning, everything was in motion. My sister had no idea that while she was busy planning how to spend the money she thought was hers, I was already preparing to strip her of it completely, and not just strip her, but twist the knife in a way she couldn't fight, couldn't undo, couldn't even see coming. That day at the office, when I promised everything would be settled tonight, I wasn't lying. It would be settled. Just not the way she hoped. And that's the thing about revenge, if you want it to hurt, you can't rush it. You let it simmer. You make them believe they've won. You let their guard down so low that when the blow finally lands, it crushes them. So yeah, the day my dad died was the day my sister declared war on me. But what she didn't realize was that she wasn't just fighting me. She was fighting the ghost of the man she'd betrayed, the bloodline she tried to hijack, and the storm I'd been quietly preparing my whole life to unleash. The funeral may have buried my father, but what happened in my office that day? That was the birth of something else entirely. And trust me, you'll want to hear how it ends. You know, people always assume family means loyalty. Blood is thicker than water, right? Well, let me tell you something, sometimes blood is the first thing to betray you. When my sister stormed into my office with her lawyers, that wasn't her first attack. No. That was just the loudest. The truth? Our war had been brewing for years, long before my father's heart finally gave out. Let me take you back. Growing up, my sister and I couldn't have been more different. She was the golden child, at least in her own mind. Always hungry for attention, always demanding the spotlight. My father saw through it most of the time, but she had a way of wrapping him around her finger whenever money was involved. Me. I stayed in the background, did the work, built my life with my own 2 hands. I wasn't looking for a crown. I wasn't looking for applause. But she was. She always was. I remember one night when I was 16. Dad had just finished paying off a piece of land by the coast, the same land she would later try to sink her claws into. We were sitting outside, the 3 of us, when Dad said something that stuck with me: land isn't just dirt. It's legacy. It's roots in the ground when everything else floats away. I didn't fully get it back then. But I do now. My sister, though. She rolled her eyes. She didn't care about legacy. She cared about luxury. For her, land was just a price tag waiting to be cashed. And that's the fracture right there. Dad left behind properties, accounts, land, but he also left behind values. One of us inherited those values. The other? She inherited greed. So when she burst into my office after Dad's death, that wasn't grief talking. That was years of entitlement finally boiling over. She thought it was her time to collect. But here's the part that still gets me. The way she came armed with lawyers, on the very day of his death, told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't just greedy. She was prepared. She'd been waiting for this moment like a wolf salivating for a carcass. And me? I wasn't shocked. Hurt, yeah. Angry, definitely. But shocked? No. Because deep down, I knew this day would come. I'd seen the way she looked at Dad's properties, like they were already hers. I'd overheard the whispers to her friends about what she'd do when the old man finally goes. She thought I was too quiet, too focused on my own life to notice. But I noticed. I always noticed. That night, after she left my office, I sat in the dark replaying every moment, every argument, every time Dad tried to bring us together only for her to spit venom when she didn't get her way. And I realized something: this wasn't just about money. This was about punishment. She wanted to punish me for not playing her game. For not kneeling to her imagined throne. And what better way to do it than to strip me of my father's legacy while his body was still warm? But here's the twist: she didn't realize she was handing me the perfect excuse. She gave me the push I needed. The permission, even. Because up until that day, I might have tried to play fair. I might have tried to compromise, split things evenly, keep the peace for Dad's sake. But when she came at me with lawyers, threats, and arrogance, that was the day I stopped playing nice. See, I've always believed revenge isn't about anger, it's about precision. Anger makes you sloppy. Precision makes you dangerous. And when she walked out of my office, files tucked under her arm, convinced I was cornered, I knew one thing for sure: she'd made her move. Now it was my turn. But I couldn't just strike back. Not yet. No, no, no. I needed her to feel safe first. To feel like she'd already won. Because the deeper her confidence, the harder the fall would be when the ground vanished under her feet. So I let her walk away smiling. I let her toast her imaginary victory. And while she was busy celebrating, I was digging. Digging into every loophole, every hidden clause in those files, every backdoor move she hadn't even considered. Because she thought she had 3 lawyers on her side. But what she didn't realize was that I had something far more dangerous: time, patience, and a father's words echoing in my head about legacy. And legacy? Legacy wasn't meant for her. Not after what she did. By midnight, my plan was already taking shape. Papers were moving. Accounts were shifting. The properties she thought were sitting pretty in her future. They were already slipping through her fingers. And all the while, she slept soundly, dreaming of riches that would never belong to her. But I didn't do it just for revenge. That's the part people get wrong. I did it because I refused to let her desecrate what Dad built. I refused to let her take something that was supposed to mean roots and turn it into a shopping spree. And when I figured out where the money would go instead, when I pictured the look on her face as she realized not only had she lost everything, but it had been given away to people she couldn't touch, couldn't fight, couldn't sue, oh, that was when I knew this wasn't just revenge. This was justice. The fractures in our bloodline had always been there. But now I was ready to break them wide open. Because some families are bound by love. Ours was about to be bound by war. You ever notice how the most dangerous decisions are made in silence? Not in boardrooms, not in shouting matches, but in those hours after midnight when the world is asleep and all you can hear is your own breathing. That's where my revenge was born. The night my sister strutted out of my office with her lawyers, I didn't go home to cry. I didn't call anyone for advice. I didn't even bother arguing. No. I went straight to my desk, shut the door, and laid out every one of my father's documents like puzzle pieces. The thing about my sister is, she thought having lawyers made her untouchable. But lawyers are trained to follow rules. Me? I wasn't playing by her rules. I had an advantage she didn't even see. Years back, Dad had shown me things, details about his properties, notes in the margins of deeds, small quirks in contracts that nobody else noticed. Dad was old school. He believed in paper trails, handwritten annotations, things no digital scan could ever fully capture. And while my sister was too busy chasing status, I was the one who sat with him in those quiet evenings, listening. Learning. Absorbing everything. That knowledge. It became my weapon. By midnight, I had a plan. A plan so clean it left no fingerprints. I wasn't going to fight her in court, why step into her arena? Instead, I was going to move faster than she could blink. First, the properties. Dad's coastal land, the crown jewel of his estate. That was her prize, the one she'd bragged about for years. She thought it was worth millions, and she was right. But she never realized Dad had left me co-signing authority. All it took was one phone call, one late-night meeting with a broker I trusted, and the papers were in motion. Second, the liquid assets. Bank accounts, bonds, small holdings. I knew which banks Dad had preferred. I also knew the managers by name, I'd sat across from them before, unlike her. So when I walked in with the right documents, no one questioned me. They moved quickly, quietly, and by the time the sun came up, large portions of those funds were already beyond her reach. And then came the orphanage. Why the orphanage? Because this wasn't just about stripping her of wealth. This was about turning her greed into ashes. You see, Dad used to talk about that place, a small orphanage along the coast, run by a handful of volunteers who never had enough. He always said he wanted to help them, someday. But he never got the chance. I decided to give him that chance. Through me. So while my sister slept soundly, dreaming of mansions and cars, I wired the funds to that orphanage. Every cent. Every last drop of what she thought she was about to inherit. Signed, sealed, and gone, like sand slipping through clenched fists. The beauty of it? It wasn't illegal. Not a single move I made broke the law. She couldn't sue. She couldn't reverse it. She couldn't even slow it down. By the time she found out, it would be too late. And that was the thrill of it. But let me be clear, this wasn't easy. Every signature, every phone call, every transfer carried weight. My hands shook more than once. Not from fear of getting caught, but from the enormity of it all. Because I knew, once I pulled this trigger, there was no turning back. The bridge between me and my sister would burn forever. I stared at the final authorization form for a long time. My pen hovered above the paper. My father's voice echoed in my head, "Land isn't just dirt. It's legacy." My sister's smug smile flashed before my eyes. And then, with one stroke of ink, I chose legacy. Not hers. Not mine. But something bigger. By dawn, it was done. The properties were no longer ours. The money was gone. Everything my sister had built her fantasy around had been stripped away, not by force, not by shouting, but by quiet, surgical precision. I sat back in my chair as the first light bled through the blinds. The city was waking up. Birds chirped. Cars honked. And me? I just sat there, sipping cold coffee, knowing the storm was about to hit. Because in a few hours, my sister would walk into my office expecting papers signed, inheritance secured, her lawyers victorious. She'd be smiling, confident, ready to gloat. And that's when I'd drop the bomb. That's the thing about revenge. The sweetest part isn't the act itself, it's the silence right before your enemy realizes what you've done. That heartbeat of disbelief. That split second where their brain refuses to accept the truth. That's what I lived for. So I waited. Calm. Ready. And when she finally arrived the next morning, her jaw would hit the floor. They say revenge is best served cold. But I disagree. The best revenge? It's served calm. Colder than cold. So calm it rattles your enemy because they can't decide if you're serious, or if they're going insane. The morning after I made my move, I sat in my office waiting. My desk was clear. Coffee steaming. Papers stacked neatly as if it were any other day. But inside, I was wired, like a storm hiding behind still skies. And then she walked in. My sister. Dressed like she was already rich, heels clicking against the floor, silk blouse, designer bag dangling from her arm. The three lawyers followed like loyal dogs, briefcases in hand, ready to cash in on her victory. The smile on her face. That's an image I'll never forget. She thought it was over. She thought I'd given up. "Morning, brother," she said, settling into the chair across from me like a queen taking her throne. "I trust you've had time to think." I didn't answer. Not yet. I just lifted my cup, sipped my coffee, and watched her bask in her imaginary glory. The silence stretched long enough for one of the lawyers to shuffle awkwardly. Finally, I leaned forward, rested my elbows on the desk, and said, "Everything has already been settled." Her smile widened. "Good. I knew you'd see reason." And that was the moment I decided to break her world. I slid a single folder across the desk. Thin. Too thin for what she expected. She frowned, flipping it open. Inside were the receipts. The confirmations. The transfers. Proof that every property, every account, every asset was gone. Not hers. Not mine. Donated. To the children's orphanage, I said softly, watching her eyes scan the words. Along the coast. Dad always wanted to help them. Now he has. Her face froze. At first, I thought she'd laugh, call it a joke. But no sound came. Just silence. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again, like a fish gasping for air. Her lawyers leaned in, reading the papers, their confident expressions draining into pale disbelief. You can't," she finally stammered. Her voice cracked. "Oh, but I did," I interrupted, my tone steady as stone. She shoved the folder back across the desk, fury spilling out now. "This is theft. Fraud. I'll take you to court." "Court?" I cut her off, almost smiling. "Go ahead. You'll be suing orphans. Children. You'll be fighting to take back food from their plates, roofs from over their heads. You think a judge is going to side with you? You think the public will? Be my guest." Her lawyers shifted uncomfortably. They knew. They knew the optics were poison. They'd be dragging her name through mud, not mine. Her voice rose, desperate now. This was supposed to be mine. Dad would have wanted me to have it. And that was the final blow. I leaned back in my chair, eyes locked on hers, and delivered the line I'd been holding since the night before. No. Dad wanted a legacy. Not a leech. Silence. Pure, heavy silence. The kind that smothers a room. She stared at me, her face twisted in disbelief, rage, humiliation. Her lawyers looked away, avoiding her eyes. That was when it hit her. Not just the money, not just the land, what really gutted her was the powerlessness. She couldn't touch me. She couldn't undo it. Everything was gone, not to me, but to a cause she couldn't corrupt, couldn't taint, couldn't drag into her endless hunger. Her empire had crumbled before it was ever built. She stood abruptly, the chair scraping back, her breath coming fast. For a second, I thought she might lunge across the desk. Instead, she grabbed her bag, snapped at her lawyers to follow, and stormed out without another word. The door slammed. And just like that, she was gone. I sat there for a long moment, letting the silence settle. My coffee had gone cold. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the release of it all. Years of tension, greed, and bitterness, gone in one clean stroke. But don't get me wrong, this wasn't a victory dance. Revenge isn't joy. It's not celebration. It's heavier than that. It lingers. It leaves you with questions you can't answer. As I gathered the papers and tucked them away, I thought about Dad. About his land, his words, his legacy. About whether he'd approve of what I'd done, or shake his head in disappointment. I'll never know. What I do know is this: my sister will never forgive me. Our bloodline is fractured beyond repair. And in that office, on that morning, I killed whatever family we had left. But sometimes, that's the cost. Sometimes, to end a war, you have to burn the battlefield. And in that moment, as I watched the door she'd stormed through, I knew one thing for certain. The war wasn't over. Not by a long shot. People always ask the same thing when I tell this story. Did it feel good? And you know what? At first, yeah. It did. Watching my sister's face collapse, seeing the confidence drain from her like blood from a wound, it was intoxicating. I won't lie to you. There's a rush that comes with revenge, a high that no drug can touch. For a moment, I felt untouchable. For a moment, I thought I'd won. But here's the truth they don't tell you in movies or books: revenge doesn't end when you deliver the blow. It doesn't tie up neat and clean. It lingers. It clings to you like smoke after a fire. You can walk away from the battlefield, but the smell of ash. It follows you. The days after the confrontation were quiet. Too quiet. No lawyers at my door. No phone calls. Not even a text from her. Just silence. At first, I thought maybe she'd surrendered, maybe she'd accepted the loss. But I know my sister. Silence isn't surrender, it's strategy. And that silence? It's been humming in the background ever since, like the pause before thunder. Still, in that silence, something else grew. I drove down to the coast a week later. To the orphanage. I didn't tell them who I was, didn't need to. I just watched. Kids running barefoot in the yard, their laughter cutting through the salty air. Volunteers carrying supplies into a building that looked sturdier than the pictures I'd seen before. Fresh paint on the walls. New windows glinting in the sun. And it hit me, my father's land, his work, his legacy, it hadn't been stolen. It hadn't been wasted. It had been transformed. From dirt and deeds into roofs and meals, into laughter and hope. That was the moment I realized I hadn't just taken revenge on my sister. I'd finished something my father never got the chance to finish. But don't mistake that for peace. Because while those children gained a future, I lost something permanent. Blood. Family. Whatever fragile thread tied me to my sister was cut, and not neatly. Torn. Jagged. Bleeding. I know she'll never forgive me, and honestly, I don't expect her to. In her eyes, I didn't just steal her inheritance, I humiliated her. I made her powerless. And if there's one thing my sister can't stand, it's being powerless. So when people ask if it was worth it, I hesitate. On one hand, I protected my father's legacy. I turned greed into generosity, poison into medicine. I gave his memory to people who would cherish it, not exploit it. That part, I'll never regret. But on the other hand, I destroyed my last tie to family. I walked away from that office knowing I'd never have a sister again. Just an enemy who shares my blood. And enemies that close, they don't go away. They bide their time. Sometimes late at night, I picture her sitting somewhere, plotting. I don't know when she'll strike, or how. But I know she will. And when she does, the war will flare again. But until that day comes, I live with the silence. I live with the knowledge that I didn't just end a feud, I redefined it. I didn't just settle a score, I wrote the opening chapter of a much longer story. So, was it worth it? That's the question, isn't it? I'll say this, when I stood on that coast, watching those kids laugh, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Like for once, the pain meant something. The loss meant something. And maybe that's all legacy really is. Not land. Not money. Not even family. Legacy is what survives when the dust settles and the vultures are gone. Legacy is what lives on in the hands of people you'll never meet, in the laughter of children who'll never know your name. My sister will never understand that. She'll chase wealth, power, control, always hungry, never full. But me? I've seen what happens when you choose differently. When you turn revenge into something bigger than yourself. So yeah, the day my father died, I lost him. I lost her. I lost the illusion of family. But I gained something else. And if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Sometimes the cleanest revenge isn't destroying your enemy. It's denying them what they crave most. And giving it to someone who deserves it more. That's the legacy my father left behind. That's the legacy I chose to carry. And that's why, even now, with the war unfinished and silence hanging heavy, I don't regret a thing. And that's my story. Now I want to hear from you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have taken the deal, gone to court, or burned it all down the way I did? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, I read every single one. If this story gripped you, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe for more chilling real-life tales, and share this video with someone who loves a good revenge story. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.